The neighbor screamed just as I was coming back. His grandchildren do too much noise at night. I answered, but I don't have grandchildren. They answered, I saw their daughter-in-law cradling them every night. The next day, I pretended to go on a trip. I was at work and hid in the attic. 1 hour later, I heard the conversation between my daughter-in-law and an unknown man, which left me frozen. But before I continue, check if you've already subscribed. Subscribe to the channel and share in the comments where you're watching us from. I'd love to know how far our revenge stories go. The heat, the characteristic humidity of Guadalajara. He got in the taxi as soon as I got out the window. Such a familiar feeling, which broke my heart. After I spent a week in Oaxaca, I missed my home. I missed my son Sebastian and also my daughter-in-law Jaimna. That they moved the flight forward one day was a pleasant surprise. I smiled, gently squeezing the little box I was holding in my hand. Inside was a delicate hand-embroidered silk scarf, a gift I chose very carefully in a local market for Jaimna. I was sure she'd love it. The taxi stopped right in front of the iron gate. He knew they were home too. While I was paying the driver, I saw Doña Lupita, the neighbor next door, focused on pruning her colorful bougainvillea. She's a good woman, although a little nosy, somewhat typical in those who are already retired and have too much free time. When she saw me, Doña Lupita put down the scissors, wiped her hands on her apron, and approached the fence that separates our houses. But today her face did not show the usual kind smile. Instead, she looked clearly annoyed. "Good morning, Doña Lupita. How have you been?" I smiled as I took my suitcase out of the trunk. She didn't return my greeting. Instead, she got straight to the point in a somewhat curt tone. "Maria Eugenia, I need to talk to you. Your grandchildren make too much noise at night. The crying has kept me from sleeping for several days now." I froze, still gripping the suitcase handle. My grandchildren. I blinked, trying to process what I had just heard. A forced smile appeared on my lips. "I think you're mistaken. Sebastian and his wife still have no children." Doña Lupita shook her head vehemently, her gray hair trembling with each movement. She pointed directly toward the living room window of my house with a firm gesture that left no room for doubt. "How could I be mistaken? Every night I see your daughter-in-law pacing back and forth with the baby in her arms, trying to get him to sleep. The walls are very thin, Maria. I hear the child's constant crying clearly." Her words hit me like a stone thrown into a calm lake. I tried to keep my composure. I thanked her for warning me, but inside a storm of confusion was already brewing. I opened the gate and dragged the suitcase toward the patio. The sound of the wheels on the tiles seemed to amplify the unease coursing through my body. What was happening in my own house? I took out my key and opened the door carefully. Inside, everything was strangely quiet. Jaimna was sitting on the sofa with a book in her hands, but her gaze was empty, fixed somewhere indefinite. Upon hearing the click of the lock, she startled as if she had received an electric shock. She jumped up suddenly. The book fell to the floor with a dry thud. A quick, forced smile appeared on her pretty face. "Mom, what are you doing here so early?" Jaimna ran toward me and hugged me, though the hug felt tense. "They changed my flight schedule," I responded, patting her back. In that fleeting moment, I noticed her eyes glance sideways toward the hallway that led to the kitchen, then quickly returned to me, as if she feared I might discover something. "You must be tired from the trip," I said, trying to sound natural. "I'm thirsty. I'll get a glass of water from the kitchen." I had barely taken a step when Jaimna stopped me immediately, her voice higher than normal. "Oh, Mom, please sit down. You've traveled so much. Rest, I'll bring you the water." She almost pushed me onto the nearby couch and hurried to the kitchen alone, an air of no urgency in her walk. A moment later, she returned with a glass of ice-cold water. Upon receiving it, I decided not to beat around the bush. I looked her straight in the eyes and, in a calm voice, told her about the conversation I'd had with Doña Lupita at the entrance. I watched every tiny expression on her face, missing no detail. As I suspected, Jimna's smile vanished completely. She set her own glass of water on the small table beside her, and I noticed her hand trembling slightly, making the surface of the water ripple. She couldn't hide the flash of panic that crossed her eyes. "Ah," she cleared her throat, trying to regain composure. "She's the daughter of a very close friend. Her husband treats her badly, so she had to bring the girl here for a few days. I was going to call you and tell you, but I didn't want to bother you while you were traveling." The explanation sounded reasonable. I nodded, feigning empathy. "Poor girl, don't worry, dear. Helping friends is the right thing to do." But one small detail gave her away. When I casually asked, "What's your friend's name?" Jimna hesitated for a second, an eternal second that was enough for me to know she was inventing a name. That night, I used the excuse of travel fatigue and went to bed early, but I couldn't sleep a wink. I lay in bed, straining my ears to catch any sound from downstairs. The house was terrifyingly silent. Only the constant ticking of the pendulum clock in the hallway could be heard. I almost thought I was being paranoid, that maybe I was wrong. But then, around 2 a.m., in the darkest, quietest part of the night, I heard it. A very soft, faint cry, like that of an abandoned kitten. The sound came from the ground floor. Immediately, hurried footsteps crossed the wooden floor, then a whispering voice trying to soothe the crying, trying to silence it before it grew louder. A few seconds later, everything fell silent again. But for me, that silence was more unsettling than the crying itself. It was the clearest proof. My mother's instinct was screaming inside me, telling me Jimna's explanation was just a fragile facade, and behind that facade was a truth she was desperate to hide at all costs. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, my mind spun endlessly, piecing together the loose fragments of a puzzle I still couldn't fully see. The baby's cry, Jimna's lie, her evasive gaze, all of it whirled in my head without stopping. When the first rays of dawn filtered through the window, I had made a decision with complete clarity. I wasn't going to confront her. Doing so now would only bring more elaborate lies, more careful performances. If I wanted the truth, I would have to become a silent spectator inside my own house. I heard noises in the kitchen. The smell of coffee rose. Jimna was preparing breakfast, probably thinking everything had been resolved the night before. I took a deep breath, put on the calmest expression possible, and went into Sebastian's office. I dialed Rodrigo's number, a retired former colleague who lived in Monterey, knowing he wouldn't answer at that hour. The hold tone played as I began my monologue, speaking loudly and clearly enough for my voice to carry through the hallway. "Hello, Rodrigo, it's Maria. Yes, I arrived yesterday. Listen, I reviewed the report you sent me. There's a huge discrepancy in the last quarter's numbers. No, it can't wait. This is very serious. I have to fly there immediately and resolve it in person." I used technical terms with an urgent, authoritative tone. After a few more words, I hung up with a dramatic sigh. When I stepped into the dining room, Jimna had already served breakfast. She looked up at me with a curious expression. I didn't sit down right away. I placed my hands on the back of the chair and frowned, pretending to be completely stressed. "Jimna, I'm sorry. I have an urgent work trip to Monterey. I have to leave now. I might be gone a few days." "Mom, you just got back," she said, eyes wide with surprise. "A financial emergency. The company already booked everything. The flight leaves in 2 hours." I watched her expression carefully. At first, there was surprise. Then it quickly turned to understanding concern. But I didn't miss it. A flash of relief deep in her eyes, an almost imperceptible relaxation of her facial muscles. It lasted only an instant, but for me, it was the clearest confirmation. "Wow, I'm so sorry. How exhausting for you, Mom," she said in a worried tone. "Do you want me to help book the flight? I'll find the earliest one." "No need, dear. The company took care of everything." I turned and hurried upstairs, without giving her a chance to ask more questions. In the bedroom, I pulled out the empty suitcase. Instead of packing carefully, I just grabbed a few random items from the wardrobe and threw them in, so it would look like someone preparing in frantic haste. Meanwhile, I silently prepared another backpack, an improvised survival kit. Inside went 2 large bottles of water, energy bars, a fully charged portable battery, and a thin towel that could serve to wipe sweat or cover my face if I needed a quick nap. I hid it under the bed, behind some old boxes. When I came downstairs with the suitcase, Jimna was waiting at the door. She enthusiastically took it to help, repeating nonstop, "Take good care of yourself, Mom. Don't strain too much." I nodded and pulled her into a big hug. While patting her back, I leaned close to her ear and whispered with heavy intention, "You take care of the house, too." I called a taxi and asked to be taken directly to the airport. In the rearview mirror, I could still see Jimna standing at the entrance, waving with a radiant smile. But I knew that was a smile of relief. However, I Niamh R entered the departures area. I paid the driver, crossed to a coffee shop in the opposite building, and chose a table by the window from where I could see the entire lobby. I ordered a black coffee. Its bitter taste kept my mind sharp. I sat there watching the clock with patience. An hour passed, enough time for Jimna to believe I had boarded. Then I ordered another car, this time without a taxi logo, and gave my home address. "Please drop me at the beginning of the block, a few meters before the house with the pink bougainvillea," I told the driver. It offered a perfect view. I didn't have to wait long. Shortly after, my front door opened. Jimna stepped out, but she wasn't the same tense, strange girl from yesterday. She wore an elegant emerald green silk dress, meticulous makeup, relaxed and happy. She got into her car and drove off, disappearing around the curve. That was the moment I had been waiting for. I paid the driver, got out quickly and walked home. The entire neighborhood was silent under the midday sun. With the spare key I always carry in my wallet, I carefully opened the door, sneaking into my own house like a thief. The air inside was eerily still. The morning coffee smell had vanished, replaced by a sweet, strange scent with a faint touch of baby powder. I didn't turn on the lights. I tiptoed through the rooms and went upstairs, my heart pounding. I retrieved the hidden backpack from under the bed, then looked up at the ceiling. There was a small square trapdoor, the rarely used entrance to the attic. I dragged over the little office stool, climbed up, and pulled the rope. The folding ladder descended slowly. The smell of dust and old wood hit me as I climbed. The attic was hot and stifling. I folded the ladder back up, slammed the trapdoor shut, and plunged into darkness. I groped my way to a corner, right beside a wooden ventilation grill, with slits wide enough to see the entire living room below. I curled up in the dark corner, adjusted my position, and made sure my phone was silent with all vibrations off. My heart was pounding, but my mind was cold and sharp. The performance had begun. The attic was an oven. The air was thick, stagnant, smelling of old wood and yellowed newspapers. Through cracks in the roof, rays of sunlight painted distorted patches of light on the floor, making dust dance like ghosts. I stayed huddled against the rough wooden wall, breathing as quietly as possible. Every tiny movement could betray me with a creak. Time became thick, slow, heavy. To quiet the hunger twisting my stomach and the dryness in my throat, I carefully opened the backpack, broke off a small piece of energy bar, and chewed slowly. I allowed myself only a sip of water, guarding every drop. I didn't know how long I'd have to stay, 1 day, 2, or more. The physical discomfort was nothing compared to the chaos spinning in my head. With every passing minute, doubt grew inside me like a poisonous vine, squeezing my heart. When the sun began to set and the harsh midday light turned a warm orange, I heard a familiar car stop at the gate. My heart jumped. It was Jimna's car. She was back. I crawled quickly to the ventilation slit, held my breath, and fixed my eyes on the living room below. The front door opened. Jimna walked in, and the sight of her nearly took my breath away. This wasn't the tense girl from yesterday. Today she glowed, tanned, skin healthy, a satisfied smile impossible to hide. She took off her light jacket, tossed it carelessly onto the sofa, and went straight to the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open, the fizz of a soft drink poured into a tall glass, then the sound of her drinking it like it was the best thing in the world. Immediately her phone rang, a cheerful, lively melody. Jimna answered, and her voice instantly turned sweet and spoiled in a tone I had never heard from her before. "Hello, Daniela, it's me." I froze. Daniela, that was the name of the friend she had invented yesterday. Jimna paced the living room, phone in one hand, the other twirling a lock of hair. Though I could only hear her side, I could picture the smile on her face. Her words floated clearly up to the attic. The trip was amazing. We ate lobster at a beachfront restaurant. The sunset was indescribable, truly romantic. I felt someone squeezing my insides. Romantic, lobster, sunset. That wasn't helping a friend in trouble. That was a secret getaway, a date. Then the shrill, somewhat poisonous voice of the woman named Daniela came through the line. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Jimna chuckled and said, "Well, not even Sister Julian lets me a lot. He doesn't deny me anything. You should take advantage too and go out with your boyfriend. Don't stay locked up at home, Daniela." I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my skin, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the heartbreak. Who was Julian? Why was my daughter-in-law taking romantic vacations with a man named Julian? Daniela's voice dropped to a whisper on the other end. Jimna's next reply was the fatal blow. "Oh, don't worry. The mother-in-law is a pain. She suddenly came home yesterday and almost gave me a heart attack. I thought she'd found out everything. But luckily the kids cried so much a neighbor heard, so she only got a little suspicious. What a relief. Today she left on another trip. We're free again." That wasn't a stab in the back. It was poison, slow-spreading poison that paralyzed me completely. The annoying mother-in-law. I was no longer Maria Eugenia, Sebastian's mother. To them, I was nothing more than a nuisance that had to be removed from the path. All my sacrifices, all the love I had given this family, for her, it was just an inconvenience. I tried to breathe deeply, but the attic seemed to have run out of air. I had to keep listening. I had to know the whole bitter truth. Daniela's voice came again, apparently criticizing something. Jimna responded without missing a beat. "Okay, well, yes, your Sebastian is boring. All he knows how to do is work, work, and work. He doesn't even notice his wife or your daughter. If I were you, I would have already. I've been fed up for a long time. Maybe I already. I'm thinking, when I get back from this trip, I'm going to talk to him seriously." The calls suddenly cut off. Silence filled the room. I felt dizzy and nauseous. Everything inside me felt it was collapsing. My son Sebastian, that son whom I love so much, who works like crazy in a distant city to support his family. And meanwhile, at home, his wife despises him and cheats on him with another man. A mother's pain at seeing her betrayed son is 1,000 times worse than to suffer betrayal firsthand. A fierce rage began to boil within me. I wanted to run downstairs, yell in his face, slap him that would make her wake up from that lie that I was experiencing. But my cold reason stopped me. Not yet, it's not yet enough. I needed proof that he couldn't deny. In the midst of mental chaos, a small memory came to mind. A tiny detail that I never thought it matters to her. Jimna, my real daughter-in-law, has a faint, very small scar from a fall as a child, right above the left eyebrow. You can only see it if you get very close, otherwise. She's wearing makeup. That would be the sign. I repeated to myself in an inner voice made of steel. Don't forget the scar. Remember the scar well. I hadn't yet recovered from the shock of the call when I heard the engine from a motorcycle stopping in front of the gate. The engine noise stopped, followed by the creaking of the iron gate opening up, and then steps entering the house. Through the crack, a man, a stranger, entered the room. He was tall, with healthy brown skin, dressed in a light shirt and jeans, pretty good fixed. But what left me paralyzed was what she carried in her arms. Not one, but two newborn babies, wrapped in light blue blankets. The two of them were crying their hearts out. Their high-pitched cries broke the silence of the house. The woman I thought was Jimna ran out of the kitchen. She took babies very naturally, with an exhausted face, but with a look that reflected tenderness. She kissed him on the man's cheek, and then hugged the two children, walking from one side to the other to calm them down. "Daniela, rest a little. I'll take care of the children," the man said in a warm voice full of tenderness. She gently stroked her hair. "Do you look exhausted?" She nodded. He handed her a bottle he got ready and plopped down on the sofa, letting out a long sigh full of tiredness. Daniela, that name came back to be heard. But this time, it didn't come from a telephone. It was a direct, intimate call between two people who were standing in my living room. And in that instant, a terrifying truth. It struck like lightning and cleared everything up. It didn't make sense before. This woman, the one who has been living in my house all these days, the one who lied to me, the one who has received these children, it is not Jimna. She is Daniela. So, where is Jimna, my true daughter-in-law? The answer arrived almost immediately, bitter and cruel. In Oaxaca, enjoying some romantic vacation, with a guy named Julian. All the loose pieces of the puzzles suddenly fell into place. Such a perfect shape it was disgusting. These two women had to be sisters, that's why. They were twins. That's why they were able to deceive both the neighbor and myself. In that first fleeting encounter, the man began to lull the children to sleep. He picked one up in his arms and rocked him gently, and sang her a cradle song in Spanish. The melody was familiar, sweet, but in my ears now sounded like an unbee. Rabel's squeaking noise. He seemed very experienced, a true father. I remembered the phrase that I heard on the phone. Take advantage of it to going off with your boyfriend. So this was Daniela's boyfriend. They weren't just lovers. They also had children together, and had turned my son's house into his secret nest. I felt a deep disgust in the chest. This house, every brick, every furniture, is soaked with sweat and Sebastian's effort. My son worked tirelessly to build a home, and now it has become the stage of a dirty and deceitful work. The pain my son took my breath away. Why did I have to endure betrayal so horrible? In the midst of the confusion, Julian's name reappeared. Julian, Julian. I searched my memory, and then I remembered. Julian Rojas, the real estate agent. He had come to House several times to advise Sebastian and his wife at the purchase of a bigger house. I still have very little present its elegant appearance, its gelled hair, and that sweet smile she always wore on her lips. She was a very good speaker. She was always flattering Jimna. He praised her taste. He called her intelligent, brilliant. At that moment, I thought he was only good at selling houses. But now that I think about it, the looks he gave Jimna, those accidental touches on her shoulder, everything had another meaning, a perfect plan. Jimna was having an affair with Julian, and to avoid raising suspicions, especially from her husband, she asked her twin sister, Daniela, who would pass herself off as her. In return, Daniela and her partner, along with their two children, they had free accommodation, a safe place. In the house itself, the person they were betraying. An exchange of favors built on the emotional ruin of my son. It took me a few seconds to calm down, to contain the fury that was about to erupt. Anger wouldn't solve anything. I needed to keep a cool head. I knew what I had to do. My task didn't end with discovering the truth. I had to gather evidence, irrefutable evidence, so that when it fell, they didn't have a single excuse. I took out the curtain, my phone was on silent. I wasn't any more elderly mother hidden in an attic. I had become a researcher in the guardian of truth. I turned on the recorder. I pointed the cell phone camera through the crack and tried to capture everything, whatever I could. I recorded the image of Daniela, the lover, and the 2 children. I recorded their conversations, their complaints about life, their future plans that they argued quite naturally, in the same sofa that Sebastian had bought. Every detail, no matter how small, I memorized it. The way Daniela lulled the children to sleep, how that man prepared the milk. The toys were thrown throughout the house. Everything was proof of his existence in this house. An existence illegal and full of deception. That night I slept curled up on the floor of hard, cold attic wood. It had my stomach was empty. My body ached complete. But I didn't feel tired. There was a flame burning within me. The flame of a mother's love and indignation at injustice. I wasn't doing it just for Sebastian. I was doing it for the truth, for the honor of my family. The first day in the attic, when in the midst of a tangle of emotions, I felt a mix of anger and extreme tension. Like a wounded animal, locked in its dark cave, licking its wounds while retaining all his senses alert to danger. My only source of life at that time was a small backpack. He carefully rationed the little food he had. I had 1 portion at each meal, energy bar and some orbs of water. I had to calculate it carefully because I didn't know how long this exile would last voluntary. At midday, a lapse in judgment almost ruined everything. My phone was about to run out of battery, so I plugged it into the charger portable. But I forgot something basic. The screen turns on automatically with each new notification. And right at that moment, a message arrived from the bank, notifying a change of balance. A flash of blue light appeared fleetingly, projecting itself right through the vent slot down. Daniela was sitting on the sofa, breastfeeding her son. Instinctively, she looked up. My heart stopped, my whole body. It froze me. I didn't even dare to breathe. A single suspicious glance, a minimal noise, and all my effort, it would have been ruined. But luck was on my side. Perhaps the light was too weak and fleeting. She alone narrowed his eyes for a moment and turned back, looking at her baby, murmuring something like, if I thought it was a reflection of light in some shiny object. I let out a breath. Cold sweat trickled down the back of my neck. I immediately turned my phone face down on the dusty ground. A lesson that I will never forget. From that moment on, I became a ray. Searcher improvised. More meticulous and careful. My cell phone was my only tool, it was useful. I recorded everything. I kept a diary invisible over the lives of the intruders. What time did Daniela and her lover take out to take the children? For a walk in the stroller that I assumed they had bought it. With the money from Sebastian at 10 in the morning and at 4 p.m. How many times did they ask meal a day? 3 times. Always pizza and fast food. They probably charged the accounts to my son's credit card. What programs did they watch on television? Sappy soap operas, noisy programs, entertainment. That Sebastian will never, I saw it. His entire routine, every breath, I saw it they did. Regarding property and money, my son. An unforgivable offense. I focused especially on the audio recordings during the day. They were cautious. But at night, when the children were already, they slept and believed that that space was for them, belonged completely. They were beginning to speak more freely. I listened to the man. From how Daniela said it, I deduced that his name was Miguel. Jimna complained in an annoyed tone. He promised he would give us more than this. This money isn't worth it. Requested unpaid leave in the factory these days. Daniela let go of immediately, in a bitter voice. Of course, because she had to spend money on the trip with old Julian. Do you think some 5-star resort vacation Are they cheap in Oaxaca? That guy will be he's rich, but he's stingy. He only pays what he can. Jimna had to cover her plane tickets and all their purchases. So get your act together and stop complaining. The conversation was like a bucket of water being thrown on us cold on the face. This was not a gesture of help between sisters. It was a calculated deal, a dirty agreement. Daniela and Miguel were charging for acting in this farce. That betrayal had up to a price. The golden opportunity, the morning I had been waiting for, finally arrived next. Daniela, probably wanting to fix her face after an exhausting night with the children, dragged a small table in the center of the room, right under the vent that led to my hiding place, and began to take out his makeup. The morning light was coming in through the window, perfectly illuminating every line of her face. It was outlined eyebrows with a concentration absolute. It was the perfect moment to I acted. I carefully picked up the phone. I zoomed in all the way. I held back the breathing, trying not to. My hand trembled. But I did it. I captured one clear close-up photo, where I could see a small scar perfectly just above the end of her eyebrow left. That's where the physical test was. More importantly, the one that would unmask the whole charade of his plantation. Surviving in the attic was also a test of physical endurance and dignity. I had to relieve myself from the empty water bottles, then close it tightly and hide it in a corner dark. I felt a mixture of shame and determination. I was enduring that humiliation to do justice for me son. It was a necessary sacrifice. And then I recorded a short video that made me to make my blood boil. Miguel, with total naturalness, placed one of the children on the solid oak coffee table to change his diaper. We had chosen that table, Sebastian and I, with so much affection. It was a memory precious between mother and son. He threw the dirty diaper on the floor. Used wipes wet directly on the surface made of fine wood. Rage made me to bring the back of my hand to my mouth, to keep from screaming. My home, my memories, everything was being mercilessly desecrated. But I told myself patience. The time of the truth was approaching. The second night in the attic session passed in almost complete silence absolute. My body no longer responded. My joint was complaining. I lay down against the wooden wall, looking for a position that hurt less. Down below, after a day full of children's commotion, Daniela and Miguel, they were watching a cheap comedy show on television. Canned laughter, they were coming up through the vent. They were making noise hollow and ridiculous. In that house that already I only breathed deceit. My eyes, they were starting to close. Sleep was overcoming me after 2 days of constant tension. And right at that moment, in the darkness thicker, the cell phone he was holding in the hand began to vibrate intensely. My heart leaped into my throat. The screen lit up, revealing a name that broke my heart. Sebastian, my son. In a second of panic, I tried to find the reject button. The call came in. But my fingers were numb. They didn't answer. I didn't arrive in time. Default ringtone, clear and familiar, a short ring sounded. Before that could press the button silence. Just one ring, but it was so sharp as a knife wound. In the middle of silence. Down, the volume of the TV suddenly went down. What was that? Miguel's voice sounded alert. I held my breath, my heart pounding, about to burst from his chest. Everything's over now. Daniela replied with a somewhat annoyed tone because of the interruption. It must have been from TV, one of those silly sound effects. You always worry too much. No, they suspected nothing more. The television, the volume, increased again. I let out a heavy sigh. Back soaked, I was in a cold sweat. I was about to throw a fit, losing everything. Because of an unexpected phone call. I couldn't let that happen again pass. With trembling hands, I unlocked my phone and decided to answer my son immediately. I had to act as if I really was in Monterey. Busy with the work. My fingers moved across the keyboard. Mom's in a meeting. Is that something urgent, son? The answer arrived almost instantly. The screen returned to light up. But this time, it wasn't a terrifying call, but a message full of happy emojis. It's not urgent, Mom. I have good news. I finished the work was completed earlier than expected. The signing of the contract was a complete success. I'll be back the day after tomorrow, just in time for Christmas. I want to surprise Jimna. Oh, my innocent son. I read his message feeling my soul twisting. Innocence, her enthusiasm, pure love, the feelings he had for his wife, contrasted sharply with cruel way with the dirty truth that I was seeing with my own eyes every hour, every minute. He wanted to surprise them to the woman he loved, while that same woman was probably already enjoying their own surprise in their arms of another man. Every happy word of his, the message, was like a needle piercing into my heart. I was about to cry, but I held back. The pain suddenly transformed into a frozen decision. An idea crossed my mind. The mind. This wasn't a problem, no. It was a risk of being discovered. It was an opportunity. The perfect moment that fate had prepared to lower the curtain for this play was my own son, with his naivete, who gave me the most powerful weapon. I took a deep breath, trying to control my fingers shaky as I write a reply. My tone had to sound completely natural, like a happy mother because of the good news about your son. That's wonderful, son. I'm so proud about you. Something just occurred to me. If it's going to be a surprise, let it be a surprise true. Don't go home right away. That would take away the excitement. Sebastian answered immediately. So what do I do? Mom, I'm dying to see Jimna. A plan was drawn up in my mind with fast, clear and sharp. Reserve one hotel room near the house. Stay there tonight. Don't tell anyone. Jimna, you're back. Let her continue believing you're far away, while Mom prepare everything. When the time comes right, I'll give you the signal. I'll help you give her a surprise she won't forget never. I pressed the send button, with the heart beating strongly at the bold in my own words. My son trusted her completely. He didn't suspect a thing. His response appeared on the still full screen: joy and affection. Of course. Your plans are always the best. I'll do it, say what you want. I love you very much, Mom. After that conversation, I turned off the cell phone screen. The darkness enveloped me again, but this time it wasn't suffocating or terrifying. It was like the curtain of a stage. I was behind the scenes, observing and controlling. She was no longer a victim. I was hiding in the attic. I had become the director of this last performance. The supporting actors were all on stage. All of them. The objects were in their place. The only thing left for me to do was wait patiently for her to return, last protagonist, the real Jimna, from her false paradise. And when that girl went up on stage, he would be the one to lower the curtain. That day next, the atmosphere in the house, it seemed to have changed. Daniela and Miguel, they seemed more restless. They kept looking at their watches constantly, and they cleaned everything of hastily. I knew it. The protagonist was about to return. The wait was about to end. Finally, afternoon hours, just as I imagined, a taxi stopped in front of the entrance. From above, I saw a woman coming down from car. Although it was only a fleeting silhouette, I recognized her instantly. It was Jimna, my true daughter-in-law. But this was a Jimna whom I had never seen before. She had her tanned skin looked strong and full of life. She was wearing a dress long, elegant, and carrying a handbag brand new, the kind I knew very well even though it was out of his reach cheap. He looked like someone who had just returned from paradise. Daniela ran to open the door. With an expression of relief mixed with concern, Jimna entered the house with a completely different attitude. No, he showed not a hint of joy upon seeing her sister. Instead, she threw the expensive bag on the sofa with total indifference and glanced at his around, a critical and dominant, like a boss inspecting their territory. The first conversation between them it was a day of hugs and questions after days of absence. She was cold and calculating, of a frightening coldness. Jimna put the reaching into her new handbag. She pulled out an envelope thick and handed it to Daniela. Here your part. Everything's fine. There were no problems. Daniela took it quickly. He took a look inside and put it away. The pants pocket. Everything's fine. He replied in a somewhat annoyed tone. Except because your nosy mother-in-law returned from suddenly, it almost ruins everything. Did you already know? Was it? Jimna asked, frowning. He frowned slightly. Yes. In the morning next, he went on a business trip to Monterey. Total luck. At that moment, Miguel left the room. With a baby in her arms, she greeted Jimna with a slight nod of his head. Jimna, he barely gave her a cold look without bothered to reply. Instead, he gave an order delivered in a curt voice and without emotion. Clean everything up quickly. It can't leave a trace of you before this night. I don't want Sebastian to suspect nothing when it arrives. After that order, a frenetic and organized cleaning. They acted like a professional team, erasing a crime scene. Miguel, he was taking out huge black garbage bags full of used diapers, cans of milk empty, and fast food wrappers. Without saying a word, he carried each bag in his old motorcycle and tied them up with "be careful" at the back. Inside, Daniela nimbly dismantled the house sofa sheets where she and Miguel they had slept. He made them into a bundle and put it straight into the washing machine, adding a large amount of fabric softener. Then he took a spray bottle of the band's scent, the which I knew Jimna always used, and he sprinkled it in every corner of the house, trying to cover up the sweet baby smell that had permeated the atmosphere in the last few days. And Jimna. She didn't touch absolutely nothing. I was just walking from one side by side with their arms crossed, supervising everything. I saw her bend down to pick up a yellow baby rattle that it was under the armchair. He didn't look at it not with tenderness or curiosity, but with an expression of utter disgust, as if was picking up an insect disgusting. Quickly and without hesitation, he threw the rattle directly into the bag trash that Miguel was holding. Not a single one, not a word, not an unnecessary gesture. All that could be heard was the creaking of the plastic, the hurried footsteps on the floor, and the Jimna's short orders. Check under the sofa for that rag. Throw it away, don't wash it. Spray more on that corner. Almost an hour later, when everything seemed immaculate and the house having regained their usual appearance, the three they collapsed onto the sofa, panting. Miguel poured 3 glasses of water. Jimna, he took one, drank a long gulp, and she slammed the glass down on the table. She looked at her sister and her lover and said with icy voice, "Well, now you can go." Daniela jerked her head up with a visibly pained expression. "Where are you throwing? We haven't even rested." "I'm not kicking them out," Jimna replied in the same tone. "I'm giving up the contract ended. Sebastian, I don't want to come back anytime. Taking risks. They've already been paid, agreed. You have nothing more than to do here." That's when I knew that my moment had arrived right then, that moment, when they thought they had erased all traces, when his guard had gone down completely, when they were convinced that the work had finished perfectly. I carefully took my phone out of my pocket. I opened it, the message I had written from the night before. My hand wasn't trembling. My heart was beating strongly, but not out of fear, but out of determination. I looked at the 3 figures sitting in the room, 3 puppets in their own theater, and I pressed send. The message was only one short line and straight up. "Son, come home now, same." The time that followed was suffocating. Every second was like a hammer blow on my chest. Below, Daniela and Miguel they had lifted up. Gathering the last things, Jimna continued sitting with the legs crossed on the sofa, looking at the cell with a cold expression and impatient. They had no idea about the storm was brewing. And then it arrived less than 15 minutes later. A familiar sound was heard at the door main. The click of the key in the lock. That sound at that moment was so sharp as death scythe. The three on the ground floor, they jumped at the same time, turning the head towards the door. Jimna's face fell, going from haughty to terrified. The door opened slowly. Sebastian, he went in. My son looked a little tired after the long flight, but his eyes, they were beaming with excitement. She was carrying a bouquet of bright, radiant red roses. A broad smile graced her face, smile of a man in love, anxious to surprise his wife. But that her smile froze instantly. She died on her lips. As fast as a candle, the bouquet was extinguished by the wind. The roses slipped from her lifeless hand. They fell onto the cold ceramic floor, the soft petals scattered and crushed. A beautiful image made shattered in the blink of an eye. The eyes of Sebastian toured the room with a mixture of shock and disbelief. Jimna, his wife, was there, pale as a sheet of paper, but right next to it another identical woman, just as pale because fear. And in the corner of the room, an unknown man held nervously looked at two babies as if he had seen a ghost. Silence fell over the place, a dense, heavy silence in which I could hear every desperate heartbeat of those present. "Jimna," Sebastian murmured in a voice barely audible, broken like a whisper. "What? What's going on here?" Jimna was the first to react, perhaps out of reflex, as a last attempt desperate to cling to a liar, to a ridiculous hope. He tried, she smiled, but it was a crooked smile and pathetic. "Love, you're back. What surprise?" She's Daniela, my cousin. She only came to visit, nothing more." The lie was so clumsy that it turned out ridiculous. She couldn't explain the resemblance identical. He could not explain the presence of the man and the two children. Just at that moment, a sound came from creek ceiling, the dry and prolonged noise from a metal attic staircase that she was being lowered. All eyes, no longer from astonishment but from pure terror, they headed towards that sound. I got out step by step, calmly, firmly. She was no longer a frail old woman. Every step mine weighed with the force of truth. Lattice dust covered my clothes and my hair, making me look somewhat disheveled, but my eyes were sharp as blades, going over the faces deformed by fear down there. "You don't need to keep lying, Jimna." My voice was not loud, but clear and sharp, breaking the deadly silence. "I was here, right in that attic, from the day I went on my trip through job." I looked straight into Sebastian's eyes. I saw pain, confusion, and collapse complete reflected in my gaze, son. That scene pierced my heart like thousands of needles, but I knew that I had to do this. "Son, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for making you witness this, but there are truths you need to know." And then I started counting. My voice was firm, clear, without hesitation, as if I was reading a cold report about a crime. I recounted what Doña Lupita said about baby crying at night. I pointed to Daniela, who was trembling while he was retreating. "This is Daniela, the twin sister of Jimna, the sister of whom Jimna he never spoke to you." I moved my finger toward Miguel, who was trying to cover his eyes of the children. "And this is her lover, and those your two children have turned your house in their nest all these days, while you were breaking your back working far away." Finally, I returned to look at Jimna. Her face was already pale, without a drop of blood. Me he looked with hatred and despair, and everything this, he emphasized every word. "It wasn't more than a farce to hide that you beloved wife went to spend a few early Christmas holidays in Oaxaca, not alone, but with Julian." The name, Julian, fell like a bolt of lightning. Sebastian staggered. My son had to lean against the wall to avoid falling. Closed her eyes hard, as if wanting to erase everything I had just heard, as if wishing it were just one nightmare. Jimna no longer tried to deny it, nothing. Every lie had become useless. Instead, he screamed, which was not to deny, but the scream of a cornered, desperate beast, and beside herself, the velvet curtain of this work had finally been collapsed. The heart-wrenching cry of Jimna broke the heavy air, but not anymore. It was a scream of fear. When the last one, the mask, fell, what emerged was a raw, venomous fury. She was no longer pretending. Instead, he launched himself at the same man whom he had deceived like a wild beast, a wound that bites the hunter. Yes, everything. It's your fault, he shouted, pointing with the eye pointed directly at Sebastian. His voice, it was full of reproaches. Were you ever home? Did you only what mattered was your work, your travels, your damn contracts? Do you have any idea how alone did I feel? You turned me into an empty house owner, trapped in this frozen home. Then he turned to me with eyes burning like fire. And you too, always interfering, controlling everything I do, everything. When I buy something, he looks at me with that face of trial. I can't even breathe in this home. You are the ones who pushed me to this. I remained silent, without saying one word. It wasn't the time to argue who was right. Not Sebastian either, he replied. My son just stood there leaning against the wall with an empty face, like if his soul had left his body. He looked at Jimna, the woman who once he loved madly, as if he were a completely unknown. There was no rage, no, there was pain, only an emptiness that gave fear. Seeing that Sebastian wasn't saying nothing, Jimna became even more emboldened. He raised his chin and spoke in a tone full of defiance and arrogance. I'm fed up with this life. I want a divorce. I want to live my own life with Julian. At least he knows how to value a woman. She knows how to make me happy, not like you, who are nothing more than a machine of making money without feelings. Upon hearing that, Daniela and Miguel, they glanced sideways. They knew that the work, it was truly over, and that his papers had also come to an end. Without saying a word, they began to gather in silence the few things of the children, trying to be as invisible as possible, as supporting actors escaping from a chaotic scene, without to wait for no one to say a word. Moreover, Jimna turned around and ran upstairs to the bedroom. A few minutes later, he came crawling down a large suitcase, the same one that had used for his supposed business trip. He passed by Sebastian, who was still motionless as a statue, without even look at him. All the love, all the years of the link disappeared without a trace. When his hand touched the doorknob, I spoke. My voice was calm, but every word, it cut like a razor. That bag and the clothes you're wearing, you also bought them with the money from Julian. Jimna stopped dead in her tracks. She squeezed the doorknob, so strong that the knuckles, they turned white. It didn't happen. He turned around and only answered through gritted teeth. No. That's your business, clack. The door closed behind her with a sharp blow. And definitely, Daniela and Miguel too, they left quickly with the children. They passed by next to us with their heads bowed, like ghosts, not daring to look, without saying a word of farewell. They disappeared as quickly as they had appeared arrived. The house suddenly returned to a chilling silence. Only Sebastian and I remained, surrounded of crushed red rose petals in the floor as a symbol of a marriage that it had just broken. My son slowly sank into the floor. He didn't collapse, he just sat down slowly like someone completely exhausted. It was taken the head with both hands, the fingers tangled in the hair. I approached. I sat down next to him and placed my hand on his. He gently touched her shoulder. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. His silence hurt more than 1,000 laments. The days that followed were the most heavyweights in my life. Sebastian was like a ghost inside his own house. No, he talked, he didn't eat. He just stayed sitting for hours in his room with his gaze lost out the window. I was preparing for her mild broth. He would take it all the way to the bed and fed him spoonful by spoonful like a child. My heart was breaking every time I saw her emaciated figure. I had brought the truth to light so free him, but that same truth, it was killing me inside. 1 week it happened in almost complete silence, and a later, When I was bringing him some soup, he spoke suddenly, hot-headed. His voice was he snores from not speaking for so many days. Mom, she never told me she had one twin sister. She turned around, and me he looked. For the first time in a week, I saw that there was some clarity in his eyes. They were no longer empty. A married couple, continued in a calm voice but firm. Built on secrets, horrible things like this, it was never a true marriage from the beginning. You cannot continue. It was at that moment that I knew my son would be fine. He didn't need me to pull him out of the swamp. He himself had found the way out with his own inner strength. Upon hearing those words, I felt that the stone that had pressed on my chest all week woke up suddenly and fell away. The next day, he called his lawyer. The divorce proceedings were carried out quickly and decisively. He also submitted his resignation at the company where he worked, leaving behind the position that had cost him so many sleepless nights and trips far from home. Instead, he got a job as a consultant at a local company, a lighter workload, with less pressure, and most importantly, without having to leave town. Since then, in this house there were only my son and me. Peace and quiet. He came back, but this time it wasn't scary anymore. It was a tranquility of peace and healing. Several months passed. The wounds, however deep they were, began to heal over time. Our house was no longer laden with secrets or suffocating silences. In their place, it was filled with the simple sounds of life. The snip of the scissors, while I pruned the bougainvillea. The whistling, G of Sebastian, following an old melody. The gentle turning of the pages of a book. On a quiet afternoon, we started doing things we had never had time to do together. We reformed the small backyard garden. We sowed seeds of aromatic herbs. Sebastian, my son, who only knew about numbers and contracts, now demonstrated an amazing ability with the earth. I saw him smile more, with a genuine smile that came from the soul, not that tired, forced smile from before. The scar on his heart was still there, but it wasn't oozing anymore. It had become part of himself, a costly lesson about personal growth. One winter night, the rain was pouring down. The drops banged loudly against the windows, forming streams that flowed down the glass. Outside, the sky was absolute black, interrupted only by the dim light from the streetlights that barely passed through the curtain of water. Sebastian and I were in the living room, that same place that had once been the stage of a tragedy. The fireplace crackled gently, filling the space with cozy warmth. I was reading a novel, and Sebastian was drinking a cup of hot tea. The atmosphere was warm and calm, strangely calm but comforting. Suddenly, amidst the din of the rain, banging was heard at the door. They weren't firm knocks, but weak, insistent, almost desperate. Sebastian and I looked at each other in surprise. Who would come at this hour on such a rainy night? Sebastian put down his cup, stood up, and went toward the door. I closed the book. My heart felt a little restless. When my son unlocked the door, a burst of freezing wind and humidity entered the room. And there, standing on the threshold, was a silhouette I never imagined I would see again. It was Jimna, but it wasn't the arrogant and elegant Jimna we had known. The woman in front of us was soaked from head to toe. The rain had swept away all her makeup, revealing a haggard and exhausted face. Her hair, once perfectly groomed, was now tangled and stuck to her cheeks. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled and dirty with mud. She no longer carried a designer handbag. Her hands hung at her sides, shivering with cold. Upon seeing Sebastian, her pale lips began to tremble forcefully. Then, as if every last bit of strength had been exhausted, she broke down in heart-wrenching, deep, desperate sobs that mingled with the sound of the rain. She knelt on the wet threshold, lifted her face, drenched with tears, toward my son and pleaded through tears. "Sebastian, please, I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Please, please, give me a chance to return." Sebastian didn't close the door in her face, as I thought he would. He just took a step back, a small gesture, but enough to shield that woman from the rain. He looked at her not with the eyes of a betrayed husband, but with those of a stranger who sees someone completely defeated. His voice was surprisingly calm. "Where is Julian?" That question was like a knife straight to Jimna's pain. She sobbed as she recounted. Julian, that elegant man, had abandoned her after spending the last penny of her meager savings. He said he was just looking for fun, a pretty lover to show off, not a burden with no future. When the money ran out, he went to look for Daniela, but even her twin sister rejected her coldly, telling her she had already caused enough problems in her life and now had to think about her own family. With no education, no work experience, and no one to extend a hand, she had been wandering for days. I was in the living room, observing everything in silence. I felt nothing, not even a hint of satisfaction, like someone who has one. What I felt was a deep sadness. Sadness for a life that destroyed itself pursuing empty ambitions. Sebastian looked at the woman he once called his wife. His voice held no resentment, no coldness, just a strange peace. "I no longer hate you, Jimna, but I can't go back with you. The past is gone. This house is where my mother and I now live in peace. We cannot return to those days." Seeing Jimna's gaze sink into desperation, Sebastian added with sincere compassion in his voice. "Get up, you can't go on living like this. I know a restaurant owner downtown. She's looking for someone to help with cooking. No degree needed, just willingness to work. You can start anew there." Jimna looked up, stunned. Her tear-filled eyes opened wide in surprise, unable to believe it. The one she had betrayed without mercy was now the only one offering her help. Between sobs, she whispered a thank you. With effort, she stood up, bowed deeply before my son, a clear expression of regret and gratitude, and then turned around silently. She disappeared into the cold night rain, walking toward an uncertain future, but at least with a spark of hope. Sebastian closed the door. The sound of the bolt locking marked the definitive end of a chapter in his life. He turned to look at me, and in my son's eyes, I saw a deep peace I had never seen before. I went over and hugged him. My hug was no longer meant to comfort a wounded child, but to share peace with a man who had finally matured. At that moment, I understood that sometimes we don't forgive because the other person deserves it, but because we deserve to be free from the weight of hatred. My son chose to free himself. And in this house, finally, after so much storm, only truth and love remained. Life sometimes doesn't allow us to choose how we are treated, but we can always choose how we respond. I thought my love and my sacrifices would be enough to keep a home standing, but I discovered that sometimes it is precisely blind trust that helps fraudsters destroy it. After everything that happened, I understood that the truth, however cruel, must always come to light. Because only when light illuminates the darkness do people have the opportunity to be reborn. I went through hell inside my own house. I saw things no mother should see, but I didn't let the pain consume me. I rose not as a betrayed woman, but as a mother who did everything she could to protect her son from a future full of lies. Forgiveness is a very noble thing, but for forgiveness to exist, there must first be truth. And if I had to choose again, I would go back up to that loft. I would hide in the shadows again so that one day the truth might come to light, along with my son, more whole, stronger, and never to be deceived again. The story you just heard was modified in names and places to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell it to judge, but with the hope that someone will hear it and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering silently within their own homes? Really, I wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to avoid conflicts, or would you have the courage to face it all and reclaim your voice? I'd love to hear your opinion on this or any other story that hurts, or suggestions you may have to improve our content. God always blesses, and I'm sure courage will lead us to better days. I will leave on the final screen 2 of the most beloved stories on the channel. I'm sure you'll be surprised.